welcome all to an episode of our Wellbeing at Work podcast. My name is Rob Gould, and I am the VP of Student and Canadian Business Solutions at Workplace Options. I'm excited to be joined by our guests today, Owen Ralph, Account Manager at the PBAS Group, Ahmik Burneo, Vice President of Administration at St. Thomas University Students Union, and Divya Daboo, Vice President of Student Life at UPEI Student Union. We are pleased to have you all with us on today's episode to talk about a very important topic, supporting the well-being of international students. To give our listeners some context, over the last 2 decades, the number of international students coming to countries like Canada, the US, and the UK has steadily risen. It is estimated that in 2022, there were over 800,000 international students from all over the world, like India, France, Mexico, and the US, who chose to study in Canada. To kick off today's discussion, Owen, I'd like to start with you. Why is a country like Canada becoming such a desirable location for international students?
So, Rob, I'd say there's lots and lots of reasons. I think the reputation of Canada is probably the number one. People think, when they think about Canada, I think everybody thinks about, the mountains and the lakes, and we just have a great, diverse geography right across the country. I think Canada's also known for healthcare. So I think, people think, okay, free healthcare, this would be a good country to live in. And I think, just the popularity of North America on its own, I think that is part of the appeal to international students. You know what I mean? Living in a country that has so many resources, but we're not overly populated. So I would say those are some of the reasons I think that Canada has become such a desirable location.
Thank you. That's awesome. Divya, over to you. And you being a current international student, I'd love to hear your thoughts on why you chose Canada.
I think I can talk for a lot of people here when I think that one of the selling factors for why a lot of international students choose Canada is, of course, affordability. Compared to other countries like the United States or the United Kingdom, the tuition fees are, I think, for here at UPEI, more affordable. Canada also has a good reputation of high quality education, which of course is another very a factor that attracts students seeking a top-notch education. It's also a country that has a quite diverse and inclusive society that's pretty welcoming environment as well. And there's people from all kinds of backgrounds, and that can make international students feel a bit more comfortable and a bit more at home. And overall, I think Canada's combination of education, atmosphere, again, free healthcare, to jump off of what Owen said, quality of life, it just makes it an increasingly preferred location for students to go to. Of course, Canada is also extremely beautiful, so that's another factor to take into consideration.
Outstanding. Thanks so much. And Ahmik, over to you. What are your thoughts on that same question?
Yeah, I would like to even start saying that I agree with the answers of the other guests, because those really speaks the best view of why Canada is becoming a desirable location. But I will even add that and suggest that most international students that come have done so due to the constant promotion of the government to make Canada an easy location for immigration via undergraduate or even graduate studies. I believe that Canadian institutions are somewhat less expensive than the American or English counterparts, and they offer similar or even the same level of education, the quality of education that was mentioned before, and with more perspective to join the workforce afterwards, while getting a clear pathway and resources for a smooth immigration process. And that is something that we as international students can relate a lot. We want to have a space and environment to grow not only academically, but professionally at the same time. And all in all, I think Canada is heavily been advertised as this paradise for people looking for a new life path to try and succeed.
Thank you very much. Both of you, Divya and Ahmik, brought up this notion of free healthcare. And I want to tease that out a little bit. What do you mean exactly? And what are students hearing about this free healthcare? Ahmik, I'll start off with you.
Whenever we talk about healthcare, the first thing that will come to our mind is the healthcare system that the United States has, for, in this case, to be it private, and like the situations that even their own domestic population in the United States have to deal with, and like now bring in international students to the United States, the many challenges that those will bring to the, in terms of like finances, which is one of the huge things that we as international students have to deal with. And so whenever we hear about Canada offering free healthcare, it's one of the things that we immediately say, yes, let's go for it. I think it will be a great opportunity for us to have a great quality of life at the same time, which is something that we as international students were looking forward to not only, again, having a space where I can study, but having a good quality to live in. And of course, this is not about romanticizing the free healthcare here in Canada, because it's very well known as well that in New Brunswick, for example, there are some issues in terms of a shortage of the staff. And I believe that many other provinces also are dealing with that thing. But I think that starting with a free healthcare is the first step to offering a great quality of life to the population overall, both domestic and as well international. So yeah, and I think that, and I bet to say that that's one of the motivations for us international students to immigrate here.
Oh, and I'm going to pivot to you for a moment. We all know that free healthcare isn't really free. You, as a health plan administrator, how does that impact how you communicate to the international students?
So I would say, a couple of different things, really. The first thing is exactly it. So there are different rules in each province. So healthcare in Canada is actually, for those that don't know, it's based off of the provincial healthcare. So although there is a federal governing body, each province manages their own rules and regulations. So as Ahmik talked about, he talked about the fact that, in New Brunswick, healthcare, I think once you land in New Brunswick, you have to apply, but you're covered. You know what I mean? And then in PEI, I think it's slightly different. I think, and Divya might have to correct me, but I think it's like 12 months of being in Canada.
I think 12 or 6 months.
Okay. And then you're eligible, for like doctors and, for hospitals. And so, being the healthcare provider, we do find sometimes students think that they are covered right before, and then they're not covered. So there is coverages that we provide for the different schools so that we can make sure that they have the exact same or comparable coverage to a Canadian that lives here, if that makes sense.
Thank you very much. Divya, over to you. Just the same question, and if we can get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think I'm just going to echo what both Ahmik and Owen just said. You did also say that free healthcare is not really free again, but I think what Ahmik said was really nice, because whenever I think of healthcare, I always think of what I see online on the internet about the U.S. and their healthcare system, like the cost for even an ambulance is so high. And of course, like as an international student, you really think about everything that you do. Every penny is a lot. And I think what I do like here, though, in Canada is that when you talk of health, it's also including mental health. I think that the subject is not really shied away from, because as much as physical health is important, it's also really important to talk about mental health. So I think that's another one big factor.
Divya, thank you so much. I couldn't ask for a better segue to my next question. When students study abroad, they encounter completely different customs and norms that they need to adapt to. Students often choose to study in a country that is completely different from their home country. To give you an example, A lot of Japanese students apparently choose to study in Prince Edward Island because of the connection to Anne of Green Gables and Japan. How much do these students know about Canada before they actually get here? And do they know what they're getting into? For example, dietary customs, weather, physiological changes, etc. Ahmik, let's start with you.
Talking about cultural shock, it's something that it's undeniable, but it will vary as well from different cultures to cultures. It's not like every culture will receive the same cultural shock. Personally, I've been fortunate not to experience that much of a cultural shock. But definitely in terms of, for example, eating patterns or like the food, something I've definitely have to deal with is making home cooked meals, which is hard to find even here. And the thing about this is that this will contribute, for example, to homesickness. Many international students come in here and they're very excited the moment that they land to Canada, because you are full of this excitement about, oh, yes, I'm gonna be experiencing all of this. I'm gonna make a lot of friends. I'm gonna be part of the community. But at the end of the day, once you're starting getting used to that environment, you feel like, oh, I'm really missing home. I'm really missing my family, because we're leaving our family behind. We're leaving our friends behind. And we're even leaving our own food behind. And so those are the cultural shocks, for example, that as well matter. And sometimes we didn't end up acknowledging about the difference that we may encounter here in Canada. However, Divya mentioned at the beginning on the first question about the diversity that we can find here in Canada. And that's really wonderful, because we have such a wonderful community and such a wonderful diversity that at the end of the day, at the moment that we come here, we feel that we have a place, and feel welcome. We feel that we belong somewhere, because we have this wonderful, even the international community welcoming you. And you're on a place where you're learning more about even your own culture, or even sharing about your own culture, but at the same time that you're learning about everyone else. So it's this enriching opportunity that we have at the same time that we may experience homesickness.
Awesome. That's a great answer. Thank you so much. Divya, same question to you. And if you will and are able to share what UPEI did for you when you arrived to help you overcome these types of obstacles.
Okay. Well, first of all, I think that the depth of knowledge that international students have about Canada definitely vary from student to student. There's a lot of factors to take into consideration, such as, do they already have family or friends here, or are they here by themselves? For example, me, I was fortunate enough that my two eldest siblings attended UPEI, and they were here when I got here. I did not have as much of the homesickness as I would imagine other people had. I knew I had my support system here. That doesn't mean it wasn't a little bit difficult, but it was definitely bearable. One of the challenges that I think I faced was the winter. You hear a lot about people talking about the winter. I was preparing myself mentally. I was preparing myself physically. I was taking vitamins, but I think the winter in Canada is definitely something that you have to live through it to know what it's all about. Like, the cold is so biting, and this winter was the first time I had even seen snow, and as cheesy as it sounds, it definitely was a magical experience, but it was so different from the winter that I was used to. It definitely did take a little bit of a mental toll at first, but once you get used to it, it's really fine. But yeah, that was my overall experience. As for what UPEI does, from what I know is that the International Student Office here, they do offer presentations before you even come to UPEI. They explain about the weather, even going as far as which bus you would need to take, the transit system, and I thought that was really, really helpful, because even if I did have my siblings, of course, having a presentation and having it written on paper or online, knowing exactly what I have to do was extremely helpful.
Awesome. Thank you so much. You know, as a person who was born in Canada, I'm still not over the winters. So I can only imagine someone coming from a different climate, perhaps even a tropical climate, having to adjust to a harsh Canadian winter. Owen, over to you. Same question from your perspective.
Yeah, so, obviously I'm from here, so it's a little different, but I do have some stories. In speaking with some of the plan administrators that I work with at different campuses, I know there has been, definitely the winter story is a big one. There's been many students that come to Canada, do not bring mitts, do not have a scarf, no toque. They come and they have, wearing a spring jacket thinking, okay, well, I'm ready for the winter. And, as we all know, that's not possible, especially in Atlantic Canada. It really bites. The cold really bites through you. It's very wet in the winter, as much as it's also snow. And then if you navigate right across the country, I think, you might be in Vancouver, you're getting a lot of rain. It's, maybe not as harsh of a winter, compared to, those prairie provinces in the minus 40s. I think, you're talking about a totally different temperature. And the same thing even in Ontario. I think you get some good weather, but it's followed up by some really nasty cold weather. So I would say that's the biggest thing that I've heard is about the amount of students that have showed up without the proper clothing. But also, the dietary thing, I think that's a very interesting. I think North America, when you think about McDonald's and Burger King and Dairy Queen and all these great locations for food. And, there was a story of an international student that I was told that actually came to Canada, and they weren't even aware of, how to buy groceries. They never bought groceries before. So they're in Canada and they thought, okay, well, I'm going to eat hamburgers because that's what they eat in North America. They eat hamburgers. So I'm going to eat hamburgers. So I think about 3 months into his first term, he got very sick, because he wasn't used to just eating hamburgers all day long and fries and, maybe having a milkshake and all these kind of things. And so it is interesting, trying to, something I would never think about, going to the grocery store is just common sense. But this particular student didn't realize, how to store meat properly and, what the freezer was for. And it sounds so different to me, but, I think kind of navigating your way through that is a bit tough. But yeah, I think the winter definitely, is the more common thing that we definitely see.
Yeah, well, I can imagine, how do you prepare someone for a Canadian winter? Even if you did tell them, they may not actually believe you. Shifting gears, and this is shifting gears into a more sensitive and serious topic, but one that is, to me, very important and to me is not discussed enough. And this really deals with suicide. So recent findings published in the Bramptonist Press Progress indicate that suicide rates among international students are high due to many issues that they encounter, like how they are treated by faculty, for example. These can lead to mental health problems. What are schools doing to prepare students for life in Canada? Owen, let's start with you.
I'd say not enough right off the start. I think as much as schools are trying, and I think each institution has their own methods to try. But I know there's certain schools that don't even have an international center. I think all schools should have an international center, more check-ins with the different populations, whether it's peer groups supporting peer groups or the International Student Center having, weekly, sessions where you're learning about, navigating through each week. I think, it can be tough. We all know what it gets like here in the wintertime, when it gets dark and it gets cold. It's seasonal depression amongst Canadians themselves is bad enough, but just imagine being here for your first time and then this is something that you're going to have to deal with. So I don't think there is enough support, Rob. I really believe that. I don't know really what else could be added, but yeah, I really think more. There's definitely more. It needs to be more for the students, for sure.
Thank you, Owen. Divya, what are your thoughts on this topic?
Well, it definitely really speaks to me, this topic. Overall, I think that just ensuring that faculty, staff, or support personnel, they know, I feel like they should know that international students face quite unique challenges, and they should definitely get some sort of, I don't know, training or I'm not sure, but just to ensure that international students feel supported, and it helps create like an empathetic environment, just so that international students know that they are being heard and that their challenges are not being seen as something totally different. I will say though that I know that UPEI has a program called the UPEI International Buddy Program. I thought that was quite helpful. I was in my first year just now. I'm going into my second year, and I did register for the program. It essentially pairs you with another student who has been in UPEI for, I believe, more than 12 months, so about a year, just so that they can provide guidance and mentorship and just someone to support you while you're there. Again, from what I said before, the International Student Office here also does presentations, and it's not just about the transit, but they also do talk about how to avoid scams, housing scams or job scams, which I again thought was really, really helpful. And like by implementing these initiatives, I definitely do think educational institutions can create a more inclusive atmosphere, which obviously can then contribute to academic success and the well-being of international students during their time in Canada.
Thank you, Divya. But that buddy program that you spoke of, was that buddied with another international student who had been on campus for 12 months or longer, or was this from a domestic student who was the buddy, if I may ask?
I think that varies, because I had been paired with someone who was from my own country, but I think it might vary for each student.
Well, that sounds like an excellent program. I'll be keeping my eyes open to see if other institutions have a similar program. Ahmik, over to you. What are your thoughts on this topic?
Yeah, I actually feel I can connect with what Divya just mentioned about about the buddy program, because we here at St. Thomas, we also have the very similar program. In this case, it's not led by the university, but it's led by the International Student Association. Last year, I'm currently the former president of the International Student Association at St. Thomas, and I was running all this program of the buddy program. And it was great, actually, because I felt that sometimes we as international students come up with so many questions before even being on the plane, before even putting things on our luggages to move to Canada. We have so many questions that sometimes faculty are not even able to answer. And it's great to connect and have the opportunity to meet someone that has gone through a similar experience from the one that we are about to go to. And so what we usually do is we make a form in which we try to prioritize and ask them, do you want someone from a similar background? Do you want someone that speaks the same language that you have? Do you want someone that is from your same country? And many other questions that try to make it best as possible to make both the students comfortable. And we also include domestic students as well. And so the priority is connect an international student with another international students. But we also try with a Canadian liaison that is part of the association to bring many domestic students to also be able to be paired with a new international student, so that they can get both the experience of what is an international student experience and the domestic student experience. And just to put into context, I understand that recently St. Thomas University has hired a cultural diversity coordinator for the upcoming year. And I'm not 100% sure what their role is, but I think that's a great place to start, because considering all the cultural barriers that exist between every member of the university community, regardless of their background, because even someone from New Brunswick doesn't necessarily have the same background as someone from BC. And so I do think that having someone inside schools that oversees some type of dynamic or even training members of the community can really come along the way. Because I don't think that people should be set in their ways just because of the numbers of years or expertise they have in a certain area. Because at the end of the day, it's always good to be learning about the new challenges. Just echoing what Divya said, international students experience unique challenges. And so being an international student takes a lot of courage. And so there's a lot to put into perspective even before picking out our classes or who our counselors or professors will be.
Thank you, Ahmik. I like the point you raise about DEI. And I couldn't help but think to myself while you were speaking that this is really what DEI is all about. You have students from, in this podcast, we're talking about students from all over the world coming to a new culture, new climate, new customs, and new traditions. And what we're trying to do is make them feel as welcome, as comfortable, as included as possible. So I think it fits really well with those DEI initiatives. Moving on to the next question. In a recent survey, international students from across Canada were asked how often they felt anxious or depressed. Listen to this. 55% of those surveyed indicated that they were at risk of depression based on their answers, and 50% were at risk of anxiety. What are the needs of international students when they study abroad, and how do they differ from the needs of domestic students in terms of the emotional, practical, and physical support? Owen, why don't you start off?
So I think first off, compared to a domestic student, it's something that we kind of just talked about a little bit. I think Ahmik just brought it up, was the language. First of all, speaking a different, most of the international students that are coming to Canada, a lot of these students are ESL, so English as a second language, and some don't have very much English skills at all. So to take your courses in English and to learn, to write and to communicate in English, I think is very tough. I know that when I first started working with all students, I was told right away about a lot of the Asian students that were coming to Canada. And in particular, over in Asia, you really don't talk about mental health. It's something that isn't really brought up, and it's kind of taboo to bring it up. And so coming to Canada where everybody's talking about stigma and everybody's talking about get your support and get help and it's just a completely different environment. And so it's exciting to see that, we are pushing these mental health programs, but at the same time, from somebody from a different background, it's almost, it's like, well, what do I choose? Where do I go? There's 5 different phone numbers I can call. Like either where am I supposed to deal with these different items? So I think that's kind of a tough one. And most of the times these supports are in English. And so, it's tough for these students to really find the support that they need. So I think compared to a domestic student, there are definitely more challenges.
Divya, over to you, please.
I think I'm just going to, top of my head, first thing that comes to mind is definitely homesickness. When you talk about homesickness, it's everything. There's a 8-hour time difference between me and back home. That makes it tough to talk to parents sometimes. So that it definitely comes with a lot of challenges. And when you feel homesickness, you also feel lonely. And that, of course, contributes to the depression and the anxiety. And international students also need to adapt to new cultures. Again, as mentioned, language and the different social norms that are here in Canada. Again, I think one of the, I'm not going to say culture shock, but definitely one of the things that did surprise me was, again, how open people were talking about mental health and the queer community as well. That is not something that I was used to, but it definitely will make international students feel more welcome to speak their minds, or definitely feel more welcomed. I think one other thing that I can think of is that international students can face a lot of trouble with visas. I think that's one of the things that domestic students will probably not have a lot of difficulties in their lives. It's also very difficult to find suitable housing, understanding how procedures work, again, dietary restrictions, as we talked about, and sometimes even the healthcare. These can be quite overwhelming, and especially if you don't have like a support system to help you navigate through all of that. And I think for that, maybe institutions can work to offer practical assistance through international student offices or information sessions just to cater to these international student needs.
Thank you. That's quite a list of the differing needs that an international student would have from a domestic. Last but not least, Ahmik, what are your thoughts on that question?
I think it all comes down to support system and networks. Like, international students tend to be a little cliquey and very reserved in their ways. I've encountered, like, local students obviously have a much larger sense of their environment, how things work, and what's the best support network for them apart just from the drive and playing back to their families. So having a clear and concise support network can really benefit international students in the long run. They will feel safer and have more structured view of how to function, how to even settle here in Canada. Like, many tasks that international students do for their first time, like getting a job and knowing which bus to take, what's appropriate to say and what not to say, are often taught by a close friends, or even during international orientation week. And so, and in terms of international orientation week, if just in case the university has one, because I believe not all of the universities tends to have an international orientation week. Some others just have an overall orientation week. And so having a support network made up of peers, friends, family members, faculty, really does make a difference for us international students between having the head start to adapt or a bumpy, I don't know what I'm doing experience.
Great. Thank you so much. And our last question for today, and I think Divya and Ahmik, you may have a very different thought about how to respond than Owen, just because of the different roles you have. And the question is this: how can educational institutions create tailored well-being support services specifically for international students? Owen, I'm going to have you lead off on this, just because you have a different role.
Feedback, I would say, is number one. Knowing what students are dealing with year over year, I think, is the first thing. So basically, having your ear to the ground, and making sure you know what's been working at each institution, because there are programs and there are, different services like Ahmik talked about with international welcome week. Well, obviously that was it didn't exist at any schools when they first started having them, and then it's like, okay, well, let's try this. And so I think getting feedback from the different schools and the different students that are going to these schools is very popular. I also think learning from the other institutions, Rob, I really think that's a big one. I know that one of the schools that we work with, the very first year I went there, the international students had a different healthcare program than the domestic students, and it was not anywhere near as good. There was no prescription drug coverage. There was no coverage for vision care. Wow. So, seeing a certain population, in my opinion, the population that's actually paying more to go to these schools, but getting less services, it just seems it's wrong. It's the only way to describe it. It's wrong. So, kind of working with the schools to make, to create parity so that the students all feel welcome and feel safe and comfortable. I think that's definitely is definitely very important. But yeah, learning from the students themselves, I think, is definitely probably the number one way to create these support services. I'm going to go one step further as well, as I do think there are providers that do provide different services, whether it's a student assistance program or health plan in particular. I think there are products that are available for different schools. It's just a matter of knowing what's out there. And, you know, the educational institution actually, you know, instead of just providing the same coverage that they provided for the last 10, 15 years, actually looking to see the differences between support services that you can purchase that can help the well-being of students, because I've seen it. I know in particular the fund that we work with, it's a trust fund that the health plan for the international students is actually Canadian healthcare, where I can see in other places where when we bid on a lot of business, it's like you basically have an accidental program that's available to you if something happens to you. You know, no coverage for prescription drugs, no vision care coverage. And then with the student support services as well, I think like a student assistance program that actually has their ear to the ground and knowing what's good for students. It really makes a difference. I've worked with a couple of different programs in the past, and I can tell you the difference that we've seen with a good provider is night and day compared to some of the things that are out there.
Great. Thank you. Ahmik, over to you. What are your thoughts on how educational institutions can create that tailored mental health and well-being support service for international students?
Just to start with the context, I mean, we've mentioned it. International students are more likely to experience anxiety, homesickness, and stress in adjusting to college or university. We experience a separation from close friends, from family, the lack of comfort from our homes, familiarity with different cultural practices, and many other. We've talked about them. And still, it's not enough by just assuming that this is the same situation for every institution. I think we must look forward to a tailored well-being support services for international students. And the place to start is doing a survey to international students to gather information and that data of what is that international students need and want, and then plan accordingly. I mean, if I have to give an answer at this point, which I don't think it's the sole answer, is the friendship and social network. I may start saying that this is very important for social adjustment, and it's one of the most essential determinants of the psychological well-being of us international students. And so universities should be focusing on expanding those peer groups, those clubs, recreational sports, activities, and many other activities that facilitate those social involvement on campus, like the one we just previously mentioned and talked about, like the buddy program.
Outstanding. Divya, last word to you on this.
Yeah, I think I definitely agree with what both Ahmik and Owen just said, especially what Ahmik said. Definitely feedback and survey from international students is a big part. The buddy program, for one, I really like it, and definitely expanding on that is something to keep in consideration. Another thing is I might be reaching a little bit here, but student financial aid or scholarships that might cater to international students a little bit more would be another amazing way to go about this. And also, lastly, just organizing events that celebrate diversity and bring people from the many different backgrounds can also be extremely beneficial, just to show them that, hey, we know you're here. Here's something for you that you can celebrate and make you feel at home with your other peers who also celebrate this event. I think that would also be extremely fantastic and beneficial for the international student population.
Thank you, Divya. On that note, we will draw to a close on this episode of the podcast of Wellness at Work. Once again, I'd like to thank all three of you, Divya, Ahmik, Owen, so much for participating, lending us your thoughts and experiences. It's our hope that this reaches a wide audience and that some of the ideas that we've discussed here actually are realized and put into action, and we can look forward to that. So thank you once again, and for the rest of you, I wish you a great day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Thank you.